The Black Rider flung back his hood, and behold, he had a kingly crown, and yet upon no head visible was it set. The red fires shone between it, and the mantled shoulders vast and dark. From a mouth unseen there came a deadly laughter. "Old fool," he said, "old fool, this is my hour. Do you not know death when you see it? Die now, and curse in vain." And with that he lifted high his sword, and flames ran down the blade. My go vanen melonin, and well met indeed. I'm Arche Galadurthan, head of the modding team behind Divide and Conquer, and welcome back to Divide and Conquer as we continue with faction overviews for 4.5 with the Remnants of Angmar here in the north. So the Remnants of Angmar used to be an Orc nation way back when in Third Age, the base game. Did they have Angmar actually, or did we add them? No, I'm sure they had an Angmar. But anyway, Angmar has been Orcs for a very long time, but as of version 3, I think, we changed them to be a human faction based on what I consider to be honest, a more accurate interpretation of the lore of the Remnants of Angmar, in that they aren't an Orcish heavy nation, and they are a human nation. It is quite clearly listed that at their height and at their peak, the majority of their force were evil men who fought with the Witch-King. So that just gives you a bit of a backstory to why they're now human, if this is the first time you've seen them as human rather than Orcish. They do get Orcs, just not as many as they used to. So their starting size, you begin with 3 provinces: Condom in the north, Litash in the east, and Mount Graham to the south. Mount Graham and Condom are large starting settlements. Condom is a fortress, Mount Graham is a huge encampment, and even Litash, in fact, is a stronghold. So you start with 3 very good provinces, but you only get 3. In terms of army size, Condom has your faction leader Agendaur and 2 units of Angmar Infantry, which are a really good early tier unit. You get Hunvorn and a unit of Barrowites in the fort to the south. Even further to the south, in the Angmarim fort just there, you get Morholt the Hillman with a contingent of Rudaur men. Mount Graham has Drangu the Bloody and a couple of Orcish units, because this is your Orc sort of headquarters, if you will. And then Litash begins with Lord Scold and 2 units of Thralls, your earliest tier unit. So you actually get a reasonably sizable starting army if you pull it all together into one force. It's not too small. Custom generals as we move through. Overlord Agendaur. Now, Overlord Agendaur, just a brief note, is we have been going through the mod and creating our own lore. This is most recently seen with the Nazgul, who we renamed and wrote our own backstories for with the help of the community. Overlord Agendaur, of course, is taken straight out of War in the North, and I do have it certainly on my to-do list to replace him, because he is not made up for DAC. He is provided by another game. And the basic premise being, I don't like to use other fan fiction for our fan fiction. We want to create our own fan fiction. And as there is no real Remnants of Angmar faction at this time in the Third Age, the entire faction is fictional for the setting, we may as well go the whole hog and create our own fictional leaders. Now, he will still be a Black Numenorean, he will still be sent by Sauron, so his backstory is likely to remain the same, but the fact that he is at the moment just ripped straight out of War in the North, I would like to change. But anyway, Overlord Agendaur comes with Temple Wards, the Black Numenorean unit from Mordor, and we'll touch on the Black Numenoreans a little bit later on. Or, indeed, how they're not really here. Hunvorn is a Barrowite, and Hunvorn is my absolute favourite character because we've gone with the premise that he is essentially a fallen Dunedain from the war actually in the north way back when. I don't actually know what the official name was. The War of Angmar and Arnor, possibly? Or the Wars of Arnor? In any event, he hails from that time, which is well over 1,000 years ago, and he is now a surviving and enduring Barrowite who fights for the Remnants, and I think that's very, very cool. And he has Barrowites as his bodyguard. Moving over to Lord Scold in Litash, who is your faction heir at the start of the game and looks like a generic Angmarim general in the strategy map model. He begins with Dark Blades, who are a fantastic unit, as we shall see from the second half of the video, particularly in the early game. They lose a little toward the end of the game, but at the start they're a very useful unit and one you'll use a lot. Moving to Mount Graham, another unit that is very, very useful for you is Drangu the Bloody, because he's mounted. One of the few mounted generals in the entire game now. Drangu is quite a useful unit, but do note that he is a cavalry archer. So he is mounted, but he's slightly nerfed in the fact that he's a cavalry archer. And lastly, Morholt the Hillman, who again has a unique strategy model. He comes with Rudar Huskars, who are an armor-piercing shock infantry. And I keep meaning to do a shock infantry top 10 video because I mention them so much. And they'd be very easy to assess as who's the best. But anyway, you'll note from the strategy models that Lord Scold is the only one that has the standard Angmarim strategy model. Drangu, Morholt, Hunvorn and Agendaur all have unique models. But also note, there is no unique model for your leader. So if Lord Scold became your leader, he would still look like that. So there's no easy indicator. If you kill off all of your unique generals, there's no easy indicator as to who is then your leader on the campaign map. Also, I haven't been able to show you the standard bodyguard for Angmar, so we'll have to only do that in the second half of the video. Family tree, you did for a time have a family tree that I'd created, and through some magic sorcery I was really happy with myself. We got Hunvorn into the family by marrying him to a woman who died thousands of years ago. I really liked it. But in any event, the family tree has been returned to Teutonic because of some oddities that occurred with having Men of Ruidour, Barrow-wights, the Undead, Black Numenorians, Orcs, and Angmarim all in the family tree. It created problems with the traits and whatnot, and it was easier to just send them back to Teutonic. So you're one of the few Teutonic factions in the game, which means that if Agendaur dies, it is very likely that Lord Scold will not become your leader, because the Teutonic system is really quite, I want to say broken, to be honest. I don't know if they intended it to be this way. But under the Teutonic system, when your leader dies, it is, in almost all occasions where that happens, someone will jump over your faction heir and become the new leader. So the heir tends to stay the heir for the entire game. But that doesn't really make any odds. Lord Scold is a good general anyway. So the area you start in, of course, is actually quite handily defensible, particularly in Litash. The enemy has to come down this sort of valley, which is the heartland of Angmar, if you will. The Old Witch Realm is what it's named on certain maps. And this one's the Mountains of Angmar, and then you've got Mount Graham. You've got Gundabad away to the east, of course, with only a narrow gap for them to get through, where they then face you at Litash. They can also come around the northern side of the mountain, but with the odd tower in place, you should see them coming. So that's not too risky. Mount Graham used to, of course, be positioned here on the tip of this mountain spur, but it has since been moved into the mountains and now creates a north-south passage, which is very, very handy and allows you to get into this area better, which is pivotal, as we shall see later on when we deal with your scripts. You've, of course, got the river as well, which I think is called... No, it's not even listed on the map. It's made up, I'm afraid. But we've got this river that runs right through the heartland as well. So you've got a couple of checkpoints and choke points to defend on that. Custom battle maps. Condom is a custom battle map and looks very much like it does there, with 2 tiers, 2 walls to get through. There's gates coming into the main wall, and then you can defend the square after the second wall. Litash is also a custom battle map, and again looks very similar to that, with this time only a single wall with, I think, 3 entry points, if I'm not mistaken. It may only be 2, but it is just a ringed wall with the town square in the middle. And Mount Graham is also custom and is, I'm afraid that's the one I don't remember what it is. I think it might be the old Erebor model from Third Age Total War, the one that's kind of like a strange, you go into the mountain in 4 different points, and then you drop down into the center, I think. I can't quite remember. It's been a long time since the actual battle map was added. But in any event, it is a custom battle map, so it's unique to fight there. Other than that, though, of course, you've got to come down to Deadman's Dyke and Numinas Bree to get your custom settlements. In terms of strategy map models, Angmar do have their own. So here is an Angmarim castle, which has it's basically denoted by darker walls is really all that goes on. But this one here is also an Angmarim town, and you'll note that they're a twist on Wildmen towns, which is cool because Angmar, we've gone on the basis that the Angmarim are a sort of hybrid between Northmen and Wildmen, and so their battle maps reflect that with a sort of take on Wildmen battle maps for the strategy models, which I think is very cool. But on the actual battle map, it is just the Wildmen battle map. But they do have their own unique textures on the buildings, and there's also a very cool lighting effect that RK put into the settlements as well. So there's certain fires and braziers burning. I don't know if I've said that as the right word, because one of them is very not what that means, and the other one is a pit that holds fire. and I can never remember the pronunciation. But anyway, there's fires burning in the settlements that have this sort of blue flame, and it looks very cool, and those are in the settlements there. So speaking of rebels around you, you've already seen you're surrounded by rebels. Angsul, Gobadrine, Barchaleg, Athelin, Nofaraglor, Morvatarth, everywhere is available to you. You've just got to push out and take what you think is best first of all. The choice is up to you. On to neighbours and diplomacy. Of course, you start right next to Gundabad and you start allied with them. You also start allied with Moria and with Mordor far away to the south, because of course you are essentially the closest thing the game has to a vassal other than Dol Amroth and Gondor. But the vassal system never really works. Diplomacy in Medieval 2 has always been rather naff. It's arguably its weakest point. So vassal ships are just useless. They don't mean anything. And the vassal will always uprise and attack you almost as soon as they can. Of course, they can't in this, because you can't attack an ally without breaking first, and the AI never breaks. But note that you're just allied to Mordor. You're not a subject of them. You start at war with everyone around you. So the Northern Dunedain dwarves and high elves. So everyone in Eriador hates you and is out for your blood, which is a little disappointing and makes Angmar a little tougher, as we shall see in just a moment. There's also cause, as we'll see again in just a moment, to actually possibly turn on Gundabad, as they've got a rather useful unit that you might be able to take from them. But then we come to economy, buildings and whatnot. The concept behind the Angrim, as I've already mentioned, is based very much on a Wildman-Northman hybrid, but do note that you do not get above city, so you don't get the last tier of settlement. So you won't be able to go up to what's called a large city, which is the 4th tier or 5th tier or something like that. But you do get stronghold, so you can go up to castle and then you can go up to stronghold. So you get all the tiers of castle, you just don't get the top tier of cities. Otherwise, in terms of buildings, you get the same buildings that most people get. And if we look at the guilds, you get the Fighters Pit. So there's the Orc Pit, which gives you the Orc Fighters and Orc Hunters. And then the second tier, the Witch-King's Hall, just gives you more of those units. So it doesn't give you a melee bonus, it just gives you a nice trash Orc unit. The Fighters Pit is very easy to get, and you'll likely get it in a lot of your regions. And do note that it even starts in Mount Graham with an Orc Pit, because this, of course, is the Orc centre of your realm. But otherwise, you don't actually have any unique guilds, I am afraid to say. You do get the Advanced Blacksmith, and again, do check out the changelog, the official changelog, which, if I remember, I shall put in this video. I shall put it on all of these videos, I think, actually. I'll put it in my standard upload form wording. Do check out the changelog if you want to see where Angmar gets the advanced blacksmith, because it lists all of the locations. And for you, it's called Black Iron Plate, which is quite cool. You get the Master Builder, as everybody does, and all of your buildings, as you'll note, look like Northman buildings. It's a really fun faction, I think. It's a really cool hybrid-y sort of mishmash of Orc, Wildmen, and Northmen. It's very, very cool, to my mind. Your diplomat, of course, comes out of Condom from the Ice Tower, or Barad Haleg, which literally just means Ice Tower. This also gives you a couple of bonuses, as they always do. And do note, you are not a faction that get... I've lied. You are a faction that gets ships. You get the Longship, but you're not a faction that gets anything above Longship. You're not one of the proper naval nations, but you are a nation that at least gets one tier of ship. So you can sail the sea if you get to the sea, but you will be outclassed by the Elves. You will be outclassed by Enad Wyth as well, because they are a proper seafaring nation. And then, of course, Gondor, Dol Amroth, and the Ardenaim. But you are a ship nation. Sorry, I thought you weren't, but I suppose I think we made all Northmen ship seafarers, so you do get a little bit of a bonus from the ports. Right, and that moves us on then to the sort of gameplay events. There's only one script for the Remnants of Angmar, and I'll deal with that in a moment. But first we'll deal with sort of special and unique recruitment. You've already seen here that you get a unique Ruidour camp building, and this is where all of your Ruidour units come from. But this is... oh, damn, I should have checked that. Bugger. The Ruidour encampment for you as Angmar is available everywhere. For the Northern Dunedain, it's only available in Ruidour, but for you, it's available everywhere. So you can get Ruidour as the heart and core of your forces. You're not restricted to just building it in Ruidour. So you'll note there are two tiers of the Ruidour Barracks, Hillman Camp and Hillman Barracks, and it just gives you the two different types of units. And as I say, it's available everywhere. You also get the Warg Camp, which is called Warg Camp at the first tier, and then Mount Graham Stables. And this gives you all bar one of your cavalry options. So we've opted with Angmar, and again, I stand completely by this, but lots of people, one of the most common suggestions we get for Angmar is please give us another human cavalry unit. But no, we're standing by it. The option we've gone for is to make the Orcs the raiders of the faction. So the humans are the backbone of your army, and the Orcs are those that you send out to spread fear and chaos amongst your enemy, and particularly to raid them. So the Orcs are all your mounted options in a very, I think, fun and interesting twist, whereby normally Orcs are the worst cavalry. For you, they are the only cavalry. So you start with Warg, Skirmishes, and Raiders, and one has a javelin, one has bows, and then you get Marauders and Raiders, or Mount Graham equivalents. And again, same pattern. So you get a javelin and an archer, and then you get a better javelin and an archer. Except you don't. You get a javelin and archer, and then you get a better archer in the Raiders, which is Drangu's bodyguard. But the Mount Graham Marauders are dedicated charging cavalry. They are a useful and very good cavalry unit, so do use them well. The Mount Graham Stables, despite its name, is available everywhere as well. So that's where you get your cavalry from. And Ruadau comes from Ruadau. Everything else comes from the Barracks, sorry, not Blacksmith. Town Guard, Barracks, and then finally Army Barracks. And again, there isn't an archery range, a stables, and a barracks version. The barracks gives you all of your Angmarim forces, the Ruadauer camp gives you all of your Ruadauer, and the Wog camp gives you all of your Orcs. Aside from, of course, the Fighter's Pit, which gives you those two hunters and fighters. But another interesting unit that you get that comes from, of all places, your culture building, your shrines, are Barrow Wights. So the Barrow-wights are available in quite a few locations, but the chief location, of course, is Mengelon. If you capture Mengelon, then the main Barrow crypt building there, it trains Barrow-wights for you. But you also get Barrow-wights wherever the Barrow resource is on the map from your shrine. Now, the nearest Barrow resource to you is actually Dead Man's Dyke, so if you take Fornost, you'll get Barrow-wights from the shrine there as well. And all you have to do is look around the map and you will find these barrows dotted around. For example, if we head down to Tharbad, Tharbad has barrows. The barrows are essentially placed in all of Numenor's ancient locations. So in Numenas, Dead Man's Dyke, Tharbad, coming down Isengard, I believe, has barrows as well. Possibly Helm's Deep, yes, there's a barrow in Helm's Deep, and then out to the Gondorian cities as well, where the barrows are relatively usually well hidden, but they are still present. I don't know where the Gondorian... Oh, there it is, just north of the flag. There's the barrow. Really, of course, it should be up here on the mountain, but it would look really weird. But so the barrows are scattered throughout key Numenorian fortresses, and you get Barrow-wights from them. Lastly, you also, of course, get snow trolls, and they come from two locations only, but they don't require the barracks event in either occasion, which is very cool. So you can get a couple of them early doors. They come from Mount Gundabad, from the city of Gundabad itself. They come from the unique Gundabad building, which is called the Gate of Gundabad. And they also come from the Etten Moors, which is Morva Tarth, but only once it ascends to become a large town. So, of course, you're likely not going to get them until around the barracks event anyway, because a large town takes a long time to do. But if you really want them, you can force move your population to Morva Tarth, upgrade it to a large town, and you can train the snow trolls. They come from the walls of the settlement itself, rather than any specific building. So you don't get a troll cage, because the only trolls you get are snow trolls, and they only come from the Etten Moors or Mount Gundabad. But do note, the AI also gets them in Condom, so if you're fighting against Angmar, you may see them a little more than if you were playing as Angmar, because they will get them a little more than you. And lastly, then, that brings us on to the Witch-King of Angmar, because yes, he spawns for you. But do note, the way that faction leaders work, he will not be your faction leader. Because you can't replace a living faction leader in Medieval 2. It's simply impossible. The only way to do it would be to kill all of your high-ranking generals when the Witch King spawns in order to make him become your leader. But then, of course, you've lost all of your high-ranking generals. And you may have one, for example, at that point, deep in enemy territory, about to fight a really crucial battle, for us to then kill them off just so the Witch King is your leader. I think many of you see why we've done it the way we've done it. But the Witch King will spawn for you under... you need 4 things to have been met. You must own Condom. You must own Imladris. And you must own Fornost Erain, or Dead Man's Dyke as it's known. And lastly, Mordor must be alive. Now that last one is almost always a given. The AI never beats Mordor, so you don't really have to worry about that one. But taking Imladris and taking Fornost is a little more difficult. You don't, however, have to hold them. You just have to have them all owned on the same turn so that the game can check you own them, and then it will spawn the Witch-King for you. So you can rush and take them both if you want. I mean, you'll never be able to rush and take them both, but if you're, I don't know, some sort of demigod, you can rush to both of them, take them, hold them for the 1 or 2 turns possible for the game to check that you own them to spawn the Witch-King, and then you can give them back and you've got him. But he does not respawn for you. So if you get the Witch-King and you get him killed, you've lost him. He only comes back to Angmar 1 time, and if he dies here again, he takes the hint that his days in Angmar really are done, and he will return to Mordor. So he will not respawn for you, so be careful when you get him. But, again, lots of buts. He comes with one of your best units, which we'll see in the second half of the video because I can't train them yet. They are Guardians of Condom, and they're a fantastic cavalry unit. And the Witch-King spawns with them, so he'll be able to kill lots and lots and lots of things because he gets a really good cavalry unit. But that is the only script for Angmar in the game. So that all that leads us on then to is to talk about their difficulty. And I think, again, the difficulty rating is very much aimed at those people of skill level around my tier, being sort of decidedly average. And I would therefore suggest to those that Angmar is a 4. Now, of course, very elite players will be able to play any faction in Divide and Conquer and think they are all a doddle. The game overall is not that hard. I have to stress that. The game is not designed for die-hard Total War players who know how to exploit every single facet of the game and use it all to their advantage, to absolutely annihilate the AI. We've never designed it around that. Unfortunately, because of the way the game is set up and how poorly nations perform when they are right next to each other, it's always going to be a bit of a cakewalk for the more veteran player. But for the general player, the everyman, it is definitely a difficulty of 4. Because you are up against 4 nations who are all vying for your blood. So if you rush out early doors and capture Angsul, Gobadrine and Fueros, which is advisable, you've then got a really long front where the dwarves have only got 1 point to focus on, so they'll be hammering away at Fueros. The Northern Dunedain will be coming at any point along that line that you've just created, and you may even risk raising the ire of the elves, which is highly inadvisable because they are particularly powerful in the early stages of the game, much more powerful than you are. And so taking Morvatarth and indeed Camath Bryn, or even if you're pushing for the Witch-King and going in on Imladris, you're going to have to focus all of your military might in order to crush the elves, which completely negates any strength and defense you have on the west, which will allow the dwarves in. Once you've dealt with the Northern Dunedain, and if indeed let's say you leave the elves alone and they leave you alone, so you're able to focus on just the ND and the dwarves, then once one of those is dead, you've got Bree and the High Elves who are going to be preparing behind them anyway. Now, Bree have no hope of beating you. Their units are worse than yours at every single tier from start to finish. But the Northern Dunedain do outclass you, and the dwarves do as well, particularly again in the early game. You are essentially an evil Dale is a good way of thinking of what your units are like. And indeed, we actually based the stats of the Angmarim on Dale. So you really are like an equivalent of evil Dale. And the dwarves and the Northern Dunedain completely outclass you. And that's to say nothing of... I mean, I've already mentioned how ridiculously OP the elves are compared to you. So it is a difficult campaign. It's also difficult because you don't really have any allies you can rely on. Moria has way too many enemies to actually do anything substantial. Their forces are far too divided, so they can't really focus on assisting you. And Gundabad doesn't come west at all, so they're completely out of the fight. All you're going to get from them is trade. So in the heartlands of Eriador, you have no allies. You can try and get Dunland on side, and they will almost certainly ally with you because you're both attacking Bree. You can try through some clever diplomacy to get Ennard Wythe involved, which will at least ease the pressure, but they again will focus on Bree. You've got to deal with the Northern Dunedain and the dwarves, and hope you don't get the elves attacking you either. Couple that with the fact that it is... Angmar, unfortunately, is another one of the factions that has been sort of unintentionally nerfed financially in version 4.5, and they don't make very much money. So that is to be rectified in future versions, and of course the Barracks event is to be taken away in future versions, and we're interested to see how that's going to play with balance. But Angmar, you don't make much money, you've got lots of enemies, it's definitely a 4. So that concludes the campaign side. Let's jump over to the battle map and see what all of your fantastic looking roster actually looks like. Welcome then to Angmar's battle overview. And a quick overview shows you that they are again another well-rounded roster. There are plenty of cavalry options, plenty of infantry, and you have at least 3 ranged units. Not to mention that 2 of your cavalry units are ranged as well, giving you plenty of options. You do have a focus toward the earlier part of the game, though, again, as you can see, with most of your units, the bulk of your units, being available straight away in that very, very early tier. And there's not as many in the later stages of the game, because those two, tier 2 is included in tier 1 in terms of earliness. Now, the Barracks event in 4.5 comes roughly down this line here. So you do get everything to the right of that gap there. But of course, as I say, in version 5, there will be no Barracks event. So that aspect of these overviews will go, which is very nice. But let us turn to your first and your most common unit, the Thrall. They are poor. Very, very poor. 6 total defense, 2 attack, 2 charge. Now, they're better than Orcs, it has to be said, but they're still garbage human trash. And their sole purpose is to tie up enemy elite units and to die to arrow fire so your better units don't. They have no movement speed bonus, so they run at 100%. They're poor morale response, but they're very cheap. Very, very, very cheap. Good for garrison duty, in places that are never going to be attacked, and good for dying, which is there are certain units whose sole purpose is to die, and they are one such unit. Note that they come from your barracks. Everything else at this tier, apart from the Angmar archers, comes from one of the other types of buildings. So you may decide, if you can only get 1 barracks, to go for Ruidour instead, because Ruidour gives you 3 options at this early tier. And the most prominent unit from Ruidour is, of course, perhaps their most iconic, their Pikemen, the Ruidour Pikemen. They are just Pikemen. Now, their stats aren't fantastic, but pikes at any tier are always useful, and the Ruidour are no exception. They have average morale and an impetuous morale response, so they're much better in terms of morale than the Thralls are. Their defense is only 1 better, but their attack is 3, and of course they have a pike, so that's roughly 9 if you're trying to factor in the pike animation. They are supported by Hillmen, who are Ruidour's answer to the Thralls, another garbage unit, but with slightly better attack, so they can do a little bit more damage. Hillmen have a total defense of 4, which is worse than the Thralls by 2, but an attack of 4 and a charge of 3, so their attack and charge is twice as good, twice and 1.5 times as good, with their defense being slightly lower, so they're a bit more barbarian-esque. Their morale again is poor, and the morale response is poor. The recruitment cost varies because they're available as mercs, but it is as cheap as the Thralls, and they are 5% faster than the Thralls as well. So they're still there to die, really, but they might actually take someone with them. The first unit from Ruidour that will really get some heads rolling are the Savages, the first strike infantry. They are effective against armor, which is always very nice. Their attack is 6, which is brilliant for an early tier unit. Their defense is only 6 though, so they will often die in their first or second charge because they will fall themselves. But they're only 550, so their cheap cost and cheap upkeep allows you to get quite a few of them if you focus on Ruidour. Because remember, all of your units come from different barracks. And speaking of different barracks, no, we won't do them yet because I always do the archers first, sorry. This is why people write scripts, isn't it? Angmarim archers. Now, Angmarim archers have the name of the tier 2 unit because they're twinned with the Angmarim infantry, but their stats are similar to those of the Thralls. So their defense is 6, same as the Thrall. Their melee attack is 3, which is slightly better. Their charge is 3, which is again 1 better. And they have a missile attack of 3. So they are very much first tier archers. 3 missile is very common amongst the first human archer units in the game, but they have average morale and they have average morale response, which does set them slightly apart from the Thralls. They have 24 missiles and 160 meter range with an average accuracy. So they're by no means very good archers, but they are your first archer, and so they'll see a lot of battle because of that. They're not very good once they've finished with their bows, having no shield and a poor defensive stat. So do try and keep them out of battle, because they won't do very much other than die. But now, speaking of different barracks, the other one is the stables, of course, the Warg camp, and it gives you the Skirmishes first and the Raiders on the second. Raiders second. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Warg skirmishers are javelin-throwing fiends that are effective against armor with their javelins, which is a nice little addition. Their melee attack is 5, their defense is 8, and their missile is 8. So their javelins are their sole and main purpose. Once they've finished with their javelins, they are slightly faster cavalry, and of course they do scare horses, so they always get a bonus against mounts. But their defense is only 8, their melee attack is only 5, They're not fantastic cavalry, but they'll do in the early tier. They have an average morale and an impetuous morale response, so they'll survive relatively well. But a better, in many ways, unit are the Raiders, because the Raiders have a bow, so they can keep firing for a lot longer. Their missile attack is 4, so it's better than your foot archer. They have more missiles than your foot archer, but a considerably lower range. So they will get shot a lot by enemy arrow fire. They have average accuracy as well, so they're not going to kill too many, but they'll get a reasonable amount with a 4 missile attack. Average morale and impetuous morale response. Their defense is only 6 and their melee is only 4, so even worse than the skirmishers when they finished with their bows. So you want to try and keep them out of combat for as long as you can. But do note that, like Gundabad, whenever we do their overview, the wargs of the north have a white and grey theme visual, so they are slightly markedly different from that's an oxymoron. They are different from the wargs in the south, who are always either brown or black, which is cool. It just gives a little visual indicator that you're in the north. So that's the first tier. Then we come to the sort of tier 1.5, because they're not really a new tier, but these stats are better. We'll start with the Angmar Infantry. They again come from your normal barracks. They are a sword and shield unit. So normally there'd be a spear unit here, but this time there isn't. They have an attack of 6 and a defense of 11. So they are about as good as Gondor Militia. So it takes you to your second tier to get to Gondor's Militia tier. So that, again, indicating that you are more like Northmen than you are like Dunedain. Average morale response, no speed bonus. They're just a standard dedicated sort of militia tier unit. So you're one of the first nations we've covered in these overviews that has a trash tier and then a militia tier. I need to do a list of who we've done, because I keep forgetting who we've spoken about. They are supported at this tier. Their cost, 600. So again, will be relatively low upkeep, and that's not too expensive for a unit at all. So you will field quite a few of them throughout. Supporting them from the Ruadar camp come the Landsmen, and they are an interesting axe-throwing unit. You can't have a Ruadar faction without axe throwers. Battle for Middle-earth is ingrained in all of us that men of Ruadar must throw axes, and so they do. Now, they're skilled against mounts and effective against armor with their throwing weapons. And they're skilled against mounts whatever, but they're effective against armor with their throwing weapons, and I think with their backup weapon as well. We should start writing that on here, actually, if their secondary weapon is, because this point only ever applies to the primary weapon, which in this case is the throwing axe. So whether the secondary weapon is AP, I don't know, but I would guess it is, because they are axemen. Once they've finished with their throwing axes, they then just wield battle axes. Their melee attack is 10, which is fantastic when they're also effective against armor, and their total defense is 11, so that's relatively low, but they are a direct and fantastic improvement over the Savages, but they do cost an awful lot more, so the upkeep for them will be higher. But with a 10 attack that's possibly effective against armor and the axe is thrown beforehand anyway, they're a really useful unit, a very, very handy unit. They get bonuses against mounts and cavalry and whatnot. They're 5% faster than others. The morale is now good rather than average. They have 3 missiles, 65 meter range, and high accuracy, so they'll hit a lot with their heavy wielded axes. And they have impetuous morale response, so they'll deal well with shocks. Then we come to your dedicated post-barracks event units. These are the units that will really start to win the campaign for you, and they are the Warriors of the Iron Crown. Iron Crown Halberdiers, Warriors, and Longbowmen. We'll start with the Warriors. A two-handed sword wielder. Looks very much like the two-handed steel sword from Skyrim, doesn't it? I've been playing Skyrim too much. Iron Crown Warriors, 13 attack, 16 defense, but do note that 10 of it is in armor, so against arrows, their armor is only 10. And against an armor-piercing unit, their total defense is dropped down by 5. But they are very good strike infantry, sans the fact they don't have any armor-piercing. Good morale response, movement speed's 100%. They have a recruitment cost of 850. They're not fantastic warriors by any stretch of the imagination, but compared to everything that's come before them, for you, they are beacons of power and strength and should be used well. And supporting them, again, these units are from the barracks, because of course they are your Angmarim units, are the Halberdiers. Now they're just Halberdiers, so they are again effective against armor, making that, for those of you keeping count, 4 units that are effective against armor in your roster, and we're only about halfway through. So you're a very anti-armor faction, which is handy, because the dwarves absolutely love armor, And the Northern Dunedain also have a bit of a penchant for armour as well. And of course the High Elves have been wearing heavy armour for literally thousands of years. So everyone you're up against except for Bree is going to be well armoured. So it's useful that your army can deal with it. The Halberdiers have a 6 attack, which isn't fantastic, but it is AP, so it's a little better. 16 total defense, and of course Halberdiers are very good at being defensive units because they can form the pike wall, which allows them to form a nice solid line. They don't get the same benefit that the pike animation offers, or proffers, rather, but they do still get at least a better defensive bonus than a sword and shield or a two-handed sword warrior would. These ones are very much the anvil, and the warriors are very much the hammer. No movement speed bonus, good morale response, and a bonus against mounts, of course, they're Halberdiers. And then we come to Rudaur's final offering, the Bodyguard of Morholt the Hillman, Rudaur Huskals, looking very, very nice. Rudaur's aesthetic has always been one of my favourite, and indeed Rudaur is just one of the more interesting nations in Middle-earth, I think, because they're one of the few nations that sort of flip-flops good and evil, and I quite like that. Huskals are a direct upgrade to the Savages from the tiers below. They cost more, but their attack is 2 better, their charge is 2 better, and their defense is twice as good, with an effective against armor trait again, of course, good morale, impetuous morale response, and 5% movement speed buff. They're not by any means the best strike infantry in the game, as we shall see whenever I get round to that damned video, but they are a good strike infantry, and certainly for you, one of the best that you're going to field. And again, another armor-piercing unit. So the armor-piercing just... I think only Isengard has more armor-piercing units than you do. So very, very handy. Supporting you as well, of course, are the Iron Crown Longbowmen, who are a much better archer than the archers before them. Their melee attack is 6 compared to the 3 before. Their missile is 5 compared to 3, but their charge is the same. But where they really shine is their defense is more than twice as good. So they will do better if the enemy shoots back, which the enemy is very fond of doing, as I'm sure you're all aware. And they will also survive, at least for a little while, if the enemy catches them in melee. So all round a solid little unit to use, considerably better than the archers, when you consider as well that their cost is only about 250 gold coins more, which is not double the cost, but you're getting double the benefit in essence. Or I suppose if you said circa double the benefit, it'd be better. Their range is only 20 meters more than the 3 Angmar archers, and they have the same number of arrows, but they are more accurate, with a high accuracy as well. So just all round a better archer, and you don't have to pay twice as much for them. And lastly, the final offerings from Mount Graham come now as well, in the form of Raiders and Marauders. You'll also note that the Wargs at this tier now get armor, and they get these cool headpieces, which is very, very snazzy. And also your units are now heavily armored as well. They take on a much heavier armor look. Also note that I think they upgrade to get the old Condom Guardian armor that many people are really, really fond of, this type of armor. No, I don't think they do. I don't think they do. Ignore me. Ignore me. So we'll start with the Raiders because they're the bow version. And again, it's just a direct upgrade to the Raiders from before. So Raider is always the bow one, and Skirmisher is the javelin, and then Marauders the cavalry. So if you see Raider in the name, you know it's using a bow. And they are just they really are just better versions again. So their melee, missile, and charge is all 2 points higher. Their defense is twice as good. They cost 900 compared to the 670 though, so again, you're not paying double the price, but you're getting double the benefit. And they can form a Cantabrian circle as well, which is quite handy. It makes them harder to hit. Their range is only 10 meters higher than the Warg Raiders, but their accuracy is high, and they have 32 missiles. So the same missiles, slightly higher accuracy, but only 10 meter higher range, so they will come under enemy fire as well. All dismounted archers have at least a range of 160 unless they are Orcs, who have a really piss poor range. I think Snagger units only have 130 maybe, but even them are still greater than these. So you've always got to get up close with cavalry archers. It's always the payoff. You get maneuverability at the cost of range. And lastly, the Warg Mount Graham Marauders. Sorry, all over the place with the words. That is part of the charm, is it not? One hopes, don't tell me otherwise. Mount Graham Marauders are heavy-hitting cavalry that are very good at killing other cavalry because they're wargs. They get a 16 total defense, which is fantastic for a cavalry unit because they will then not die when they charge into the spears of your enemies. Their attack is 8 and their charge is 9, which is fantastically high. So a really good charge cavalry. Not good at all in prolonged melee. Do not keep them in prolonged melee. Their secondary attack is only 7, and with the hitbox that the wargs get, and indeed any horse gets, they're so easy to kill. You should just never keep them in melee. Their recruitment costs 930, 5% movement speed bonus over other wargs, but do note that wargs in general, because of the animation of camels, which is what wargs use, they are slower than horses. Now, the animation, of course, has been tinkered with and played with so that wargs have their own sort of unique animation, but it still leaves them slower than horses. So that 5% buff probably actually only brings them up to about as fast as other horses, so you've got to watch out for that. So those are your dedicated mainstream. We then come to your elites. And starting with the ground forces, the unit that will make the most hurrah, and that you'll see a lot of because Lord Scold has them as his bodyguard. Oh, no, he doesn't. He has Dark Blades now, doesn't he? Northguard. Northguard are again effective against armor. They wield a cool-looking mace, and they have a shield. So a nice defense stat of 24. Their attack is only 7, though, so not wildly high for an elite unit, but the AP really brings it up. 5 charge isn't fantastic either. They're much better at holding the line than they are at attacking the enemy, and it's always nice to have AP as just a nice little bonus, but they are primarily a defensive unit. And should be used as such. Their morale is very good and their response is good. They have no movement speed bonus though, and they cost quite a bit for what you get, but they again come from your barracks. The other ground infantry unit, and a fearsome unit that you really want to get into your armies, are the Barrow Wights. They again are effective against armor, and they frighten the enemy. I think it's the first unit that does actually frighten the enemy, if you don't count horses. And so they're going to be inspiring terror. They're relentless, so they can't be staggered. They have 2 hit points, coupled with a total defense of 20 anyway, and a high attack of 12. They are only let down by their small size. Because whilst relentless cannot be staggered, it can still be hit by lots of units, so they can still be surrounded. And you just have to hope that they kill the enemy quicker than the enemy can surround them, because 57 is a very low number. Their morale is excellent and locked, so they will not run away. They have a movement speed bonus of 15%, making them arguably one of the fastest foot infantry units in the entire game, bar possibly the Oathbreakers. Their morale response is impetuous, they deal with shocks well. They have no terrain bonus though, so they don't like fighting anywhere, and they don't actually like fighting in barren or snow. Which seems wholly wrong as I read that now. They should have no bonuses or negatives. Or failing that, they should definitely prefer fighting in barren because they come from a barren land. So that will almost certainly change in future. But at the moment, that is how it is set up. But it shouldn't be like that. They're a really, really good unit, but they are very costly. Now, it says varies because, again, they're a mercenary unit. That's the easiest way to implement the script that revolves around them in Mengelin. But they're costly and their upkeep is costly. Which again actually strikes me as completely wrong, doesn't it? Because they'd have no upkeep. They don't eat, they don't drink, they don't sleep, they don't need any kind of shelter. They are undead beings that wander the land in search of blood. I think, to be honest, they should have 0 upkeep because they literally have no upkeep. Their weapons date back from a long past and are sort of half mythical blades. So they don't even need anyone to take care of their weapons. They shouldn't have an upkeep. And I think I will float that idea. I'm going to write that down. Or this may be one of those occasions where I just do it. And if someone says, oh, I think that's game breaking, then we might look at it. But I don't think it's game breaking. You don't actually get very many Barrow Wights throughout the game. The nearest place you can even train them is Fornost. It will take you a long time to get there. And you need the second tier of the shrine in order to get them anyway. So it's a very long time before you get them. So having a good unit with no upkeep is really not going to change your campaign very much. Because they're also, once you can train them, they're rare anyway. They have a replenishment of like 20 turns or something stupid. So you're not going to be getting loads of them. So I don't think them having no upkeep matters. And it's very thematically correct, isn't it? I think people would look at that and think, oh, that's cool. Of course they have no upkeep. They don't eat or drink. There's nothing to pay for. They don't care for wealth. They're here purely to slay people. So we'll look at that in the future. But anyway, enough of the Barrow Wights. I'm ranting about them. Let's move on to the Dark Blades. One of the cooler looking units, and a unit that's been floating around in the files on various different mods for many years. When I first joined the modding team 8 years ago, this unit had already been created way back then. I can't remember which mod I'd seen it in. And it's often used as a Dark Numenorian unit, but we've used it as the Dark Blades for Angmar. This unit is really very, very useful. They can hide anywhere, they can place stakes, they frighten the enemy. They have a 6 missile attack, which is obviously the highest of anyone in your army. The total defense is only 14, which does let them down quite a lot. The defense is the tier below, and worse than the tier below. But their high melee attack and better missile and better charge, coupled with the scaring enemy units, does make them a lot better. They have a 10% movement speed bonus, so they're running quite quickly. They have very good morale, and they're not locked, which is, I think, useful. Their morale response is good. 190 meter range, so they're not dedicated rangers, but they have rangers missile damage, but they're not equivalent to rangers. But they do still have high accuracy and 30 missiles. But they require a frozen north region. So they only come from basically every province that borders the large province at the very top of the map that you can't enter. They only come from the far, far north, so they're quite rare. So the most common archer for you will be the Iron Crown Longbowman and the Angmar archers for most of the game. And finally then the Guardians of Condom. This unit only comes from Condom, as the name might suggest, but it is the bodyguard of the Witch-King, and it is just a mounted version of the North Guard. They're skilled against enemy mounts, they're effective against armour, they frighten nearby enemy infantry, they have a high attack of 8, a 23 total defence, which could be better, but it's not awful, a charge of 7, which is nice, and as I say, they come from Condom only. They're very good morale response, but they're slightly slower than other cavalry, so they are let down by that. But do note they ride the Nazgul horse, and there are a couple of units, I think Imladris has 1 or 2, that get a dedicated bonus against anyone riding the Nazgul horse. So do just watch out for that. But it's never anything that actually makes too much of a difference, to be honest. But there'll be a couple of units. I'm fairly certain it is Imladris that has a couple of units that are good against the Nazgul horse specifically. And so you could just watch out for that. Read the unit cards of your enemies and you'll know. But the North Guard, the Guardians, are also quite expensive, but they're really, really helpful. And the last time I played Angmar, which was when we changed them to a human faction, the Guardians of Condom basically saved my campaign. Every single battle that had them in needed to be a victory, and it was because of them. They completely saved my hide. But I don't think I actually won that campaign. I think I cancelled it before we won it. Or no, I can't really remember. In any way. Finally then, your bodyguard. So this is the Bodyguard? This is the dedicated bodyguard, the Witch Knights. They are, as you can see, a sort of altered and amended version of the Dark Blades. They have a nice shield, which the old Angmar army used to wield. But they do wear the Dark Numenorian style plate armor. An attack of 10, a total offense of 28, making them your highest defended unit, but most of that is in armor. They frighten nearby enemy infantry, but otherwise they're just relatively good sword and shield. There's nothing that really makes them stand out. They have a nice high defense, but the dwarves have a better defense, so do the elves. They have an attack of 10, but they're not armor piercing, and the bodyguard of the Northern Dunedain is armor piercing. So they're bested by others, but they're still really very good. They're much better than Bree. They're much better than Moria if you fight against them. Dunland, Ennard Wythe, they'll beat all of those, no trouble. But they're not the best unit. Now, I've not put the Snow Trolls in. Now, that's primarily because there's not enough room. This is all the space available for a custom battle. But also because Snow Trolls are very much only a side unit for you. Whereas there is another faction in the game where Snow Trolls are a much, much more important unit. And factors into their gameplay way more than it does for Angmar. So I'm going to put the Snow Trolls into that faction overview. But now we come to who are we up against next time. There's a lot of grey and white colouring going along there. There's a bit of dark colouring at the back. And what is that large unit there? One wonders. That we've just spent ages talking about. Oh, would you look at that? It is Snow Trolls. There they are. And of course it's because Snow Trolls really are a Gundabad unit. So it will be the Orcs of Gundabad that we detail in the next overview. Now the Orcs of Gundabad are a really cool twist on Orc factions. We didn't want to just add a really generic replacement for basically Angmar Orcs. We wanted to make Gundabad really stand out. Now a lot of people disagree with some of the options that we've taken, thinking that we've stepped perhaps too much on Isengard's toes. But the premise behind Gundabad is that they are an elite fighting orcish force, in that they are the best orc fighters in the world. But they're also relatively well armoured, and the other thing that stands them out is they have archers that actually can kill things, and are not just there to cover the battlefield in little tacks, basically. Their archers will actually kill the things that they shoot at. They're really good archers. So that is Gundabad, and they are up next week. And as I say, I'm going to write a little list to myself of who we've covered, so that I don't end up accidentally fighting against someone we've already seen. But there's Gundabad fighting away. And the Snow Trolls, as I say, is very much really a Gundabad unit. So that they'll be in the Gundabad overview. But do note, this is the unit you get. You only get it from Gundabad and the Ettenmoors, but you do get Snow Trolls. And there they are fighting away. And before you ask, it is unfortunately impossible to have a general that looks like a Snow Troll. So there won't ever be a Snow Troll general. So those of you who are familiar with Battle of Middle-earth, where much of the inspiration for this Angmar Enforce comes, there's not going to be an equivalent of the Troll general that you get in that game. And I can't remember his name. Can't remember the name at all. There's the Lieutenant of Condom, isn't there? I can't even remember his name either. He's a sort of wraith guy. And then there's the Troll general. And then, of course, you get the Witch-King. And I think that was it, isn't it? Anyway, it's been a long time since I played the game. But there we are. That is the overview for Angmar. Angmar is a very fun faction now, and they don't. And no longer do they feel like a clone of Moria with a couple of Mordor units sprinkled in. They are now a completely unique army. There is no other nation like Angmar in the game. The closest is probably the Ar-Ardenaim. And the similarities are there in that the Ar-Ardenaim are kind of an evil Gondor, and Angmar are now an evil Dale. So that's the similarity that they share. And they're just a really good, fun faction, if you can survive. It can be really difficult, the campaign, so do watch out. For those of you who maybe don't consider yourself the best Total War players, there is a challenge in the Angmar campaign. But for now, that's going to conclude this episode, so thank you very much for watching, if indeed you have. And until we speak again, dear friends, na varne den per mat melonin, and farewell.